appreciate it. Thank you. Obviously, one of the most fundamental changes that need to be made in politics is the trying to figure out some way of getting money out of for us to say, well, the other side's corrupt, the other side's anti-democratic, and you and I could have a very, very long conversation on how that's true and what Trump is doing around corpus, around rule of law, around all of these fundamental legal principles that undergird a system of law that has allowed us to prosper over the last 250 years. Having said that, you lose all standing to critique when you rig the primary states, for example. All of a sudden, it's not New Hampshire, it's South Carolina because you will do better in South Carolina. Boxing out anybody that could possibly run against you in a primary, even though you said you're only going to run for one term. And then, you can have all the critiques you want about RFK Jr. and the vaccines and some of the stuff that he has said and done over the years. But literally boxing out Robert Kennedy's son from a Democratic primary debate, or anyone else for that matter. I'm just using that as a point. That is anti-democratic. So Democrats need to get on the stick here and realize that the perception of the party in places like Jackson, Ohio, and Youngstown, Ohio, is not the same perception that people had of Democrats when Vern Reif was in or Jim Trafficant was in. It's a much different world now. And if we don't learn that and rise above that, then we're going to be in the wilderness for a long time.
One of my biggest arguments has been, I think anybody that's on the ballot should be allowed to come and present their cause before a primary. And man, did I find out about the thumb on the state. Got in trouble for inviting a candidate down who was not the chosen one. And you're right, that hurts our credibility. Voters are smart enough to make their own decision if they get an opportunity to listen to a candidate.
Okay, let's move on to education in Ohio. The state of Ohio has a school voucher system, which in part subsidizes religious schools. This inevitably means that fewer dollars are available for public schools. The Ohio Constitution provides that, and I'm quoting here, no religious or other sect or sects shall ever have any exclusive right to or control of any part of the school funds of the state, close quote. Tim, what is your opinion about school vouchers for religious schools?
The problem in southeastern Ohio is that we can't use the voucher system at all. We have very few private schools down here. The counties around us have none. We have one. Also, because of our impoverished area, we couldn't match the $8,000 that they would give us. Many of the citizens couldn't, to send their kids to school. So it does us no good. And yet we're penalized by reducing our funding.
Tim? I mean, that hits the nail on the head. I mean, I don't think there's going to be a Democrat's going to get in and absolutely reverse, what's now probably coming on close to 30 years of some level of voucher system in Ohio. I think what they've done in the last year is absolutely out of control. And what they want to do, and what you're hearing from, their presumptive nominee, what he wants to do is put a current system that's outrageous on steroids. And so I think this is actually an opportunity for Democrats to go into these rural communities, and you couple this with the Medicaid cuts that have to come through the tax bill that the Republicans are pushing in D.C., which is going to affect rural hospitals. And you pair that with the voucher program that's in place now and wants to get expanded. What's that going to do for rural schools? I mean, literally is going to be a death knell for these communities, in which the goal should be, how do you resuscitate these communities? How do you invest into the rural hospital? How do you invest into their schools with shop class, with skills training? How do you try to steer some supply chain economic development into these communities? I've said this for a long time. There should be some level of coordination with Jobs Ohio and some of these other state entities, because I come from Niles, Ohio. It's 20,000 people. A factory or some kind of company with 250, 300, 400 solid, good paying jobs transforms the community, right? The schools, the tax base, police and fire, libraries. People can all of a sudden vote for levies because there's money circulating in that local economy. And so we need to have a plan to go into these communities and stop being so stupid and say, oh, we're for broadband. Like, that's been the Democratic rural agenda for like 20 years. Oh, we're going to bring you broadband. And we still haven't brought them broadband, even though we put a lot of money behind broadband. You got to have a more robust plan for them. And I think the opening there, I think, is the voucher. So it doesn't need to be expanded. It needs to be pared back. There's lots of ways to work around it. And I'm sympathetic to the idea, and Cleveland City Schools, that there may be kids that want to get out of there. I get it. And there needs to be reform within our public schools, quite frankly. But what they're doing is trying to dismantle the public schools. And
I agree.
Because they
a
hate
little
the
bit
teachers union.
To another topic. Virginia's governor recently issued an executive order prohibiting students from using cell phones during the actual school workday. I think this is an interesting idea. Do you agree with that approach?
All for it, 100%, no doubt. This is an epidemic in our society around attention span, around brain development, around just kind of the mental health issues that kids are facing if they're getting on social media too much. The perception that many times on some of these platforms that everything's okay and my day's always good and I don't have any problems, or you're looking for like affection and attention from social media, which is bad enough for adults, and we all see it on social media and it's pathetic. But for a kid's brain, brains aren't fully developed till you're 24 years old. So to have kids running around worried about what somebody on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok is thinking about them, I think is very damaging. I think we should use technology, but right now technology is using us. So I'm all for a ban up to high school, like tough crap. You can't use your phone. I'm sorry. Is life that hard for you? Get to school, study, sit down, learn how to focus and pay attention.
I think in Virginia, it's elementary, middle school, and high school.
Yeah,
you can use the phone before school and after school, but during school, I think they can't use them.
Yeah.
Dennis, what do you think?
Well, I think another thing is the state passed a bill that allows kids to be removed from school during the school day for particular religious instruction. And we are behind the 8 ball because of the COVID lockdown. Our kids are behind and our teachers are scrambling to try to catch up with what's lost. But you're taking kids out of instruction time. And I see that as just as damaging as these cell phone issues.
Tim, what we've got here is a retared teacher. Dennis he's an old teacher, been a coach all his life, and that's his point of view. I move a little bit along the same line. Children in public schools, and this is all over the country, but definitely in Ohio as well, are having trouble with reading and math. Now, I take it as a Democratic Party policy. We could say that thing about cell phones. I personally agree with it 100%. Is there anything we can do to boost reading and math scores for schools, especially in rural Southeast Ohio? I'm thinking in terms of special subsidies for math and reading tutors.
I think there's a manpower issue there, that you need more people actually sitting down with kids, helping them work through these issues. That's for sure. I do think there's probably an opportunity with technology to help kids move along. And you see that starting to develop. There's some interesting stuff coming out of artificial intelligence with how to work with kids and kind of move them along. We should explore all of those options. But I think there's a foundational issue here, that I've written books about and have tried to advocate for. I mentioned it earlier. We've learned more about the brain in the last 20 years than we have in the previous 200 years. And one of the things, we've got two things we're trying to deal with here. One is we have a lot of kids, and I'm sure you guys know about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences that kids have. And we know about the heroin and fentanyl epidemic. We know about the economic crisis. We know about divorces, parents dying. I remember going to a school in Warren, Ohio when I was congressman. In one middle school, they lost 7 parents to overdose deaths within like a few months span. And it was right around the test taking time. What that does to a kid's brain, that brain is in trauma. And I think we've got to have a foundational approach as we move forward to say the first step is you have to get a kid's brain out of trauma. They're literally in fight or flight mode. If you put an fMRI on their head and monitor how their brain's functioning, it's not functioning much different than a vet who comes back with severe post-traumatic stress. And what we need to understand, not to get too far down a rabbit hole, but I think it's really important for us to look at it. When your brain is in fight or flight mode, you literally cannot access the prefrontal cortex area of your brain, the part of your brain that controls your attention span, your working memory, your ability to focus and pay attention and process information. That all happens in this most evolved part of our brain. But if you're in fight or flight, that goes out the window. You're in survival mode. So I just think that if we are going to approach education in a transformational way that is going to actually allow us to get kids in a spot where they feel safe, they feel secure, and then there are plenty of exercises teaching kids how to pay attention. We yell at kids to pay attention. We never teach them how to pay attention. That's got to be foundational. You could talk about reading and math all you want. If kids are scrambled because of their trauma, then they're never going to be able to learn. So I just think let's modernize the education based on most recent data and science. And you will watch these kids come right online with their math and reading and their test scores if you address the fundamental issue of trauma.
Okay.
Well, Bill, before we move on that, here in Jackson County, we were like an epicenter of the opioid crisis, and we just lost one of our judges who started one of the first drug courts. But one of the things that he discovered, as well as our juvenile court judge, is like you said, it's a multi-generational. If we can get mom and dad clean and sober, then the kids stand a better chance. They do better, as do their children. So we've been able to track at least 2 more generations once we get mom and dad cleaned up, and they do better in school than what the other children are doing.
Yeah, and that plays into Medicaid and those issues as well, and treatment and mental health treatment. And that's the thing. I mean, I don't know, guys. Like, we just gotta, as a Democrat, I say this as a Democrat, we've gotta talk to people about how all of these things are integrated. These aren't separate. Like, Medicaid is not separate from education, and education's not separate from food and diet. And your food you're eating is not separate from mental health coverage and rehab and treatment, and it's all got to come together. And it's not like we're going to cut all this stuff because it's just a bunch of losers who are dependents. It's like, well, wait a minute. We have 330 million people. We're competing against China with 1.4 billion. We're competing with India against 1.3 or 4 billion people. Like, you got to have everybody on the team, Team USA. But that means getting them to where they need to be in order to even learn. You're not even talking about skills or apprenticeships or certifications or going to college. We're just talking about getting you in the race of life. And do I want it to be the government to do that? No, I'd rather it not be. But guess what? There's nobody else that's going to do it. So we better grow up and figure out that we've got to get this thing called government actually working again. And right now, people don't believe it's working. And they devolve to a position, well, maybe this guy can fix it because he's rich,
Yeah. Let's move on to what I kind of consider a pulp magazine issue, and that's transgender students in the school system. The general question, Tim, would be, how should transgender students be treated at schools? Of course, they should be treated well. But for example, there's this vexatious issue of restrooms. Do you have an answer to that?
It's complicated for everybody to deal with. I mean, most of this, I think, needs to be left to the local schools. Some schools don't have any regard for this at all because it's not an issue for them. Some need to handle it and figure out how to deal with it. And that school board and that superintendent and those teachers and the parents, I think, need to be involved to figure out how to handle that in a compassionate way. I just, to me, it's got to be dealt with at the local level, and it's got to be dealt with as close to the situation as possible, as compassionately as possible, especially if it's ongoing in that community. There's no saying, well, you shouldn't have had a surgery, or you shouldn't have transitioned or any of that. It's actually something that needs to be dealt with. And I think a lot of that stuff just needs to be handled locally.
I agree. What about athletic teams? Should there be a rule about I think 3 kids in the whole country competed in athletic teams prominently?
Yeah, I mean, to me personally, I don't think someone who, transitioned from male to female should be playing female sports. That's me.
I agree. Yeah.
I can't get my head around that. I just don't think it. And, I've got a niece who's a great soccer player up at Warren John F. Kennedy High School up in Trumbull County, where I went to school. I just think there's a level of unfairness there. And if you want to compete, you can compete with the boys' sports, but to me, it's not fair. And again, this is where we got to all be adults here. Do you have to be a jerk about that? No. Can you be compassionate about it? Of course you should be. A lot of Christians in Jackson. I went to Catholic school, consider myself a Christian as well. And if you want to ask yourself, what would Jesus do? He would be compassionate. That's what he would do. And he would ask everybody else to be compassionate and not to judge. At the same time, there's a level of fairness, I think, in play here, and just having a boy who's transitioned play girls' sports, just not for that.
Coach, what do you think, Dennis?
I think that the percentages of kids participating that are transgender kids is really minuscule. Now, that doesn't take away from what you said, but it's blown out of proportion for political purposes.
Oh God, 100%, Coach. I agree with you. 100. If I'm not running for anything, but if I was, I would give you that answer and say that's less than 0.5% of the people in the state of Ohio are dealing with anything like that or want to be engaged in that conversation. We got to talk about the things we just talked about. How do you get a skilled workforce? How do you bring jobs to Jackson? That needs to be 99% of what Democrats talk about. And if you get veered off on that, on any issue, that issue or any other issue, you're not going to win an election, because that's what most people are talking about.
So you're suggesting it's not a real issue to start with.
But here's now my one little devil's advocate here. Calvin and I both will tell you, if there is a transgender in the military and they're willing to lay down their life and fight for the flag, the Constitution, I think to wholesale throwing them out of the military for the only reason is that they're transgender and not based upon performance is absolutely horrific.
Agreed. I mean, they're not mutually exclusive. I think they're two different things. So you can have a position that says, male, female, transition, whatever. If you are a fighter pilot and you meet the scores and you meet the physical qualifications, serve America. God bless you. You're an American citizen. Let's go. And you're over 18 and you're an adult, and let's do what we got to do in the military. I think that's fine. I got no problem with that.
Okay, let's move to another topic. You had mentioned before Medicaid. Tim, let me just kind of sketch that out a little bit and then ask your opinion. In Ohio, Medicaid has two layers. In traditional Medicaid, the federal government pays 64.6% of the state Ohio costs. State pays the rest. Under the Obama Affordable Care Act, Medicaid was expanded to include adults with incomes up to 138% of the federal poverty level. In 2024, the federal poverty level was $15,060 per year for one person. Ohio approved the expansion. I believe that was under a Republican governor. And as a result, an estimated 769,869 Ohioans received Medicaid help under the expansion program. The federal government had paid for 90%, still is, 90% of the cost of the expansion program, but now it looks like coming up in the new budget, it will stop paying that much. So, Tim, what would be your reaction to the probable collapse of Medicaid expansion program in Ohio?
Well, it's going to have a significant negative impact on working people across Ohio and the country. It's going to mean that the state, I think, inevitably is going to say, well, we're not picking up the tab for this. So the state is going to then, knock people off the rolls, reduce coverage, and it's going to have a detrimental effect to the health and well-being of people in the Medicaid program, many of which are senior citizens who are both on Medicare, dual eligible, as they like to say, on both Medicare and Medicaid. And if you're in a nursing home in Ohio, there's probably a decent chance your Medicaid's paying for it because you had no savings, because people don't have pensions anymore. It's hard to have retirement accounts anymore. And so they burn through that rather quickly and they end up on Medicaid, and Medicaid's paying the bill for the nursing homes. And it's going to have a huge impact on the health and well-being of people in Ohio. And stuff rolls downhill, as they like to say. And it's going to be those working class people who are going to ultimately bear the burden of this. And again, this is going to be in line with a tax cut that's going to extend low rates for billionaires and millionaires, and make significant cuts to veterans, to working class people, to seniors. They're going to feel this. And again, we've got huge debt and deficits at the federal level. But hey, let me take a half step back too, because I'm getting a little bit fired up. When we started trading, when we had this global trade regime, we said we're going to trade with China. We're going to do NAFTA. Okay, I was against it. I thought it was going to have disproportionate impact on places like Ohio, which it did. Through that, China generated, trillions of dollars in wealth. America generated trillions of dollars in wealth. China invested their money in the high-speed rail. They lifted 1 billion people out of poverty, hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. I remember going to China, and the national bird was the crane, literally, because there were so many cranes in Shanghai, building new buildings, modernizing their infrastructure. They went all in on electric vehicles now. They're dominating the world market around electric vehicles and batteries. That's where they put their money. What did we do with our money? We started 2 stupid wars, right, with Afghanistan and Iraq. And Afghanistan I could kind of see, but Iraq at the end of the day was the one that cost us all the money. We had all the vet bills coming back from vets with, losing limbs, post-traumatic stress, and all that. President Bush did 2 rounds of tax cuts that went significantly disproportionately to the top 1% and 5% of the wealthiest people in the country. Mm-hmm. And then Trump came in and did the same exact thing with his tax cut. Then we had a pandemic where we're blowing money on the pandemic. Much of it we needed, all through a tax cut. So now we've got a $30 trillion debt. We're paying more money on interest on the debt than we are for our military. Okay, figure that out. Every year we're paying more on the interest on the debt that we have than we're paying to fund our own military. And now the Trump administration is saying we're going to hold these taxes, and we're going to cut $500 billion out of the Medicaid program to continue to squeeze people, and it's going to continue the divide. So the American people need to say to the president, who made a lot of promises and should question the Democrats as well, like, we generated trillions of dollars in wealth with global trade, and prices are down at Walmart and for Christmas and for clothes. And that was part of the deal, is like, well, we're going to offshore this stuff. Where were the investments in the Jackson? Where were the investments in the Youngstown? Like, no one gave a shit. Like, they let these communities fall apart because the top 1% wanted tax cuts and the stock market was doing pretty good. So everyone was making a lot of money. And I don't begrudge anybody for making money. And there are really smart people who do a really good job of figuring out how to make money. It's the government's job to create policies that steer investment, whether it's public or private, back to the communities who built the damn country. Like, I was out west, and I'm in Phoenix a couple weeks ago for work. And I'm looking at Arizona, right? And it's booming. It's absolutely booming. And I'm happy for those people. And it's a beautiful state. I'm not like mad at anybody. But you know who built that? Jackson. Workers in Jackson, workers in Steubenville, East Liverpool, and Youngstown, and Akron. We were sending our tax dollars to the federal government. The federal government sent it to Arizona, built water systems, power systems, and all of a sudden this desert has really nice golf courses and a huge community because of our tax dollars. So then you go to globalization, these communities get decimated, and we're not going to do anything for them. Like, they contributed to the national effort for a good long time. They served in the wars. They did what they were supposed to do. They worked hard, took showers after work, not before work. And now all of a sudden they're forgotten. And Trump hasn't done anything for these guys. And so, like, if the Democratic Party wants to actually govern again, they need like a real message to say, we know you've been forgotten. Democrats forgot you. Republicans have forgot you. And you know what? We need to go to rural areas. Like, you go to the black community, you're like, Democrats take the black community for granted. Republicans ignore them. You go to the rural areas, it's the Democrats have ignored the rural areas, and the Republicans have taken them for granted. So let's be for working people, whether they're white, black, brown, urban, rural. Like, let's get a new agenda going here. I think that's what the country's crying out for.
Well, I want to go back to that Medicaid.
End of rant.
Yeah, well,
I agree with you.
I'm prejudiced for southeastern Ohio and Appalachia and how we've been ignored. And this Medicaid business in Jackson County, 33% of our children are on Medicaid. Yeah. We're talking about whether, people are going to survive or not. And 26% of all of Jackson County is on Medicaid. That's cut. And that's going to do some really serious harm to the people of Jackson County, as well as all of Appalachia.
Well, you guys could get cranked up pretty good.
Hold on. I'm still fired up here. Coach, let me just say, it's very similar in Southeast Ohio as it was to where I grew up in the Mahoning Valley in Youngstown. They took our labor, they took our steel, they took our supply, they took our manufacturing, And then when it wasn't working for them, they just closed the steel mills down and left. In Southeast Ohio, it was the same thing. They would take the raw material, they would take the coal, they'd take it out of the community, they'd use everybody, black lung, the whole 9 yards. I was very involved in the pension and the health care and the benefit stuff that was going on for the coal miners in Southeast Ohio, and made a lot of really good friends with those guys. And it was the same thing. They took the coal, made everyone sick, and then they left. And then said, well, the government can pick up the tab on the pension. The government can pick up the tab on the black lung and healthcare benefits. And it's just like, what kind of country do we want to live in where we're just abuse people and then move on because it's going to get our stock prices up? You know, and I don't know. I just get so frustrated. I appreciate you guys giving me a little bit of therapy session here.
We do it with each other every week.
Let's move in a different direction when you guys are through carrying on. What can be done to investigate Medicare and Medicaid fraud by medical providers such as doctors and hospitals? We hear an awful lot about waste, fraud, and abuse, and I think there probably is some cushion or fat to take out of these programs. But I'm struck by the amount of fraud that apparently is committed by the providers, not the folks, but the providers, the doctors and hospitals. And my instinct is that it takes human beings to investigate these things. And DOJ comes through and gets rid of the human beings, the workers, the investigators, and the government who can make this better. And I think this applies to Medicare, Medicaid. I think it certainly applies to Internal Revenue Service when you've got investigators who are trying to collect back fraudulently withheld taxes. That takes human beings to do the investigation. Human beings are being let go. So when DOJ talks about waste, fraud, and abuse, I think that's a lot of malarkey. And these people are just trying to generate cash for their next tax break for the millionaires. So Tim, do you have any views on that part?
Yeah, I totally agree that the goal is to dismantle the regulatory oversight. That's been going on. I remember when I first got into Congress, the Bush administration deregulated and then defunded the SEC and the investigatory arm of the SEC to oversee, but basically like an Enron, you know, and so there was nobody there to like monitor that. And so it ends up collapsing because it wasn't regulated. I think they're trying to do the same thing. I will say there are some really interesting companies that are out there. I think technology, again, we need to embrace it. There's a company I was dealing with a few months ago. They've actually got like a voice technology that there's something in your voice if you're lying about something that may tip you off. Like it's so minute. And so this technology literally for IRS or Medicaid fraud or whatever can literally pick up on your voice and not say you're guilty, but just flag you to say, that's interesting. Something came up. Let's move that over to the people, the normal people, to maybe look a little further into it. And it has an unbelievable rate of accuracy. It's kind of scary, actually. Don't let your husbands and wives use that technology on you. But to me, it's like finding that technology or AI that's able to help us sift through these mammoth amounts of information. And then the people come in too. So you got to be able to absolutely do both. But on the healthcare piece, so you need that. There is waste, fraud, and abuse. You need to do that. But we also have to ask the question, why are we so sick? You know, why are healthcare costs? Why are we spending 2.5 times every other industrialized country on healthcare and getting worse results? And this is where I align with what Robert Kennedy Jr. is saying around food.
Too much crap in the food, right?
What's that?
Too much crap in the food.
It's fake.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's like
high fructose corn syrup.
I mean, it's everywhere, and why wouldn't we pay our farmers to grow real food and help them survive? It's just it's corn oil, it's soy oil, it's wheat oil, and this is you look at the diabetes epidemic, you look at the obesity epidemic, we're subsidizing really really bad food to make it cheap for people. And again, it's great because it's cheap for people, but then look at the healthcare costs. It's driving up our healthcare costs to the point where it's going to be unsustainable. It's bad for business. It's bad for the government. It's bad for people. It's bad for productivity. It makes kids have brain fog. Again, are we trying to be competitive here and outcompete the world, or what are we trying to do?
Yeah, Europe won't even import our beef, as I understand it.
Yeah, and don't get mad at Europe. Like, what are we getting mad at Europe
sure,
for?
make the beef better. Yeah.
Like, I'm half Italian. Of course, my grandmother would, like, if I ordered a pizza, like from Papa John, she'd like freak out. You come down here, I'll make you a pizza. Cost me $2.
All right. One a little topic on this general idea, then we'll move on. In Southeast Ohio, Tim, the Veterans Administration Hospital in Chillicothe is vital to provide medical and mental health care to our veterans. During the Biden administration, the Veterans Administration attempted to shut down the hospital. Our two senators, led by Sherrod Brown, saved the hospital, especially in light of DOGE cuts. Will you be watching out for the Chillicothe VA hospital?
Yeah, you gotta, you gotta keep your eye on things. I mean, that's the problem, is you gotta be absolutely vigilant. And this Doge thing, like the onslaught to veterans, like when you look at the percentage of veterans that are in the federal workforce, which makes a lot of sense. You're serving the country in one capacity and you become a civilian and you want to go in and continue your service to the country in some other way. The healthcare piece is unbelievable. The number of cuts that they're going after in the VA, again, probably attempt to just privatize it and push this all off on people who can make a lot of money off it. But I think they got to be very careful. Like, they're playing with fire, and anything to the Chillicothe facility down there, I think you would have a lot of people in Southern Ohio generally really up in arms. So politically, it could be a nightmare for our two senators now.
Yeah, I would think so.
Well,
I
have a quick question for Tim. Coming from the body that you did of Congress, what happened that they are so willing to acquiesce their power to a Doge and to have zero oversight over the purse strings and the Veterans Administration and areas like that? What has fundamentally happened to Congress that they're no longer doing their job?
I just think they're so beholden to Donald Trump that nobody wants to cross him. Nobody wants to criticize him, which is a long stretch. I served, on the heels of Bill Clinton and through Obama. And I remember the committee chairs in the House of Representatives were like, I know this is what you want to do, but you got to come through Congress. And they held the Article I powers of the purse and everything else. And you have to go work with them because they're closest to the people. And that's how our system is set up. And so, as frustrating as it is, you have to work with the Congress because it beats having a king. But I guess you got a lot of people that would rather be in bed with the king than, stand up for their constituents. Well, and I think it can actually come home to roost. I mean, I don't think they can keep doing this. I think it'll.
What it cuts out, if Congress is not there, then the people don't have an opportunity to go to hearings and testify how damaging these cuts could be. There's no time to explore what, is going to happen because of this. And you're just not thinking about the human factor.
All right, let's move on to something which is very important, especially to lawyers. That's the immigration issues. We'll talk about the border. First, Tim, I think we all agree, do we not, that illegal crossing at the border needs to be stopped or controlled? And my question for you is, how would you do that? What's your thought?
Well, I'm for kind of all of the above with the border too. I think in some areas you're going to need, barriers, walls, fences, whatever the case. You're going to need drones. You're going to need technology. You're going to need, I think, e-verify. There's no reason why businesses along the border and in the country shouldn't very easily be able to verify whether or not somebody is here and certified to be here, or they came here illegally. How many businesses know exactly who they're hiring? Like, come on. Like, but you don't hear the president going after those businesses at all. Mm-hmm. If he does, it's just rhetoric. It's not within the policy. And then there is some initiatives that you have to have in Central America where these folks are coming from, where they're literally gangs are running these countries. So like, let's try to get to the source of the problem and solve some of those, at least help try to solve some of those issues in Nicaragua and other Ecuador and some of these other places that people are, leaving there and coming to the United States. And so that's why you have USAID. That's why you have these other agencies that can go there and help promote, so that we're not dealing with it at the border. It's kind of stemmed, hundreds and if not thousands of miles away from here.
But I understand
I'm very sympathetic, and I think Biden completely dropped the ball. He completely ignored the issue. He let it fester. He didn't say anything about it. When anybody could turn on their TV, that's not like a Democrat or Republican issue. It's like, we want to know who's in the country. We need to know who's in the country. There are bad people in the world who want to do bad things to us. And so it's not like pie in the sky. It doesn't mean you're not compassionate to refugees. It doesn't mean you don't appreciate immigrants coming to the country and helping stimulate our economy. I mean, I've seen studies where immigration reform would add like 1.7% to our GDP. And it would add to our Social Security, add to our Medicaid, because people would be paying taxes because they would be in the system legally. I don't know of very many people who just say, don't let them in. Everyone I talk to in Ohio and a lot of places like where you guys live is like, you just got to get in line like everybody else. I got to follow the rules. Why shouldn't you follow the rules?
Well, I think perhaps folks in Southeast Ohio would have a little more severe opinion than that. I have a kind of a serious question, though. Biden's policy, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, was that immigrants who had asylum claims were able to enter the country while their asylum claims were pending prior to adjudication. Now I think that policy has changed so that immigrants with asylum claims must stay out of the country, perhaps in Mexico, until their asylum claim is adjudicated. What's your view of that issue?
I think it's case by case, but the problem has been, I think, a legit criticism is like they would come into the country, they were supposed to report to court or wherever, like to process their claim, and they would disappear. And so there was no monitoring of those people. And I think that's where you start running into a problem, which is why, well, let's keep them over the border. And I've been to some of those facilities. They're pretty nice,
Or they were instructed on how to fill out their affidavit upon entry, and they said what they had to say to get into the country, and I think that system was abused. As the Democratic Party, this split on how to handle the border, Tim, how accurate is the charge? We hear it all the time, that the left wing of the party or the Western folks advocated in the past open borders. I never saw any evidence of that, but I don't know how true the charge is.
I don't. There are some in the party, and I think this is what gets amplified on Fox News. I don't think it's a lot of people, but there are some that say it should be basically a parking ticket. Like it's almost the equivalent of a moving violation or something if you come in, uncertified or not through the proper channels. I just think you can't do it that way. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense, and it really hurts us as a party to not have a pretty clear stance on this.
That's kind of where I was getting at. It does hurt the party. What effect would Biden's bipartisan immigration bill have if it had been enacted? I think that was an issue in the last election.
Yeah, I don't know the details of that to comment on it.
Okay.
You know, I'm out now, so I'm not reading through the Congressional Research Service reports like I used to. But I don't know exactly what was in it. But you know, it's got to be simple: firm on the border, know who's coming into your country, pathway to citizenship, and you know, let's reap the benefits of you know, with certifications and knowing who's coming in. That's really important. And then
Yeah, I'd like to move to a topic that gets me cranked up. I'd like to run through several categories of illegal immigrants and see whether public policy should be the same for all of them. And the first category would be, do you agree that convicted felony level criminals who are illegal immigrants should be deported after judicial punishment? Are you aware of anybody in the Obama or Biden administrations that disagree with that principle? In my brief review, it seemed to me that both those administrations were meticulous in trying to get rid of those people.
I know Obama was. I remember friends of mine in Congress who were leaders in the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. They were mad at Obama for deporting people. And he deported more people than Donald Trump did.
Yes.
And he upset some of the left wing of the party when he did that. But that's why Obama won, and that's why Obama won re-election and was able to pass, you know, Obamacare and universal health care and a lot of other really good stuff that we were able to do because we had power. But it's really hard to go to the average person in Jackson or Youngstown or, you know, Columbus or wherever you are and say it's okay for them to stay. I mean, that just...
Well, I think it depends who they are. You've got people that are arrested or charged, but they're not convicted, who are illegal immigrants. My understanding is the law of the land now that those people can be deported.
Well, I'm a I'm a due process guy. You know, I mean, like we all should be due process people. Like, I mean, you know, like if it erodes for people in the country, due process erodes for people in the country, that begins the erosion of due process. And that is foundational to preventing the government from doing what it wants to do without transparency, without legal representation, and all of these things. And the other piece of this is when we talk about habeas corpus and due process and these things, they're Latin phrases that people don't really understand. But the foundation of this system of the rule of law has allowed us to grow and become a very strong and wealthy country. It's allowed us to have, you know, markets that are pretty transparent, that work, function pretty well. And it's why the world invests money here. Now, the question we go back to is like, what do we do with that wealth? And how do we have public policies that rebuild communities? And that's a whole other argument. But the fact that we don't want to concede that position of international preeminence of where people invest their money because it's safe and secure, because we have rule of law, we have courts, you can enforce contracts. And if somebody violates your contract, you can be made whole. Like, these are all really important foundational things to the system. You have to be for holding the line on this stuff. There's no other way around it. Yeah, let it go. They're illegal anyway. No, they're here. They have process. And if they committed these crimes, they're out.
You are quoted in Wikipedia, Tim, and I'll try to capture the quote. Quote, "To watch these families get ripped apart is the most heartbreaking thing any American citizen could ever see. Because you are for these families, it doesn't mean you are not for a secure border." You were talking about the illegal immigrants who have been here for years. They've got families, they've got children, they pay taxes, they obey the law, but they're here originally illegally. Would you prevent those people, if you could, from being deported? If so, how?
You have a process, you have a process for internalizing them into the country, assimilating them into the country. It's not black and white. It's not either or. You've been here. I think you've proven yourself, and I think that comment was in reference to a friend of mine from Youngstown who
Yes, it was.
I was at the immigration center with him when he got deported. He had multiple businesses in the community, not a lick of problems, never a legal issue. Had I think two or three daughters in Catholic school up at Youngstown Ursuline, pillar of the community, invested in our downtown when nobody was investing into our downtown. And I just thought, this is not who we're trying to kick out of the country,
So maybe the better idea would be to prosecuting for the illegal border crossing, a fine or a short jail or whatever it is, and then provide for eventual citizenship for those people to keep them for the benefits they provide all of us.
It used to be one of the paths to citizenship was to serve in the military. And one of the first acts that President Trump did under his first term was to deport a staff sergeant who did 4 tours, 3 in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. He got done, he comes back for this final tour, and he was deported.
Mm-hmm.
Should, with respect to those folks who are good, I almost said good citizens, have jobs, do well, pay taxes, should municipal governments be required to cooperate in deporting this category of illegal immigrants? And do you know whether municipal governments are legally required to cooperate with it? I'm not talking about the people that have families, that pay the taxes, that have integrated into the community. And I think in Jackson, my sense of it is there are probably some folks with a questionable immigration past, but nobody asks any questions. It's a don't ask, don't tell kind of deal, and that's probably best for here. But I'm always worried that if they go on a list somewhere, some police officer might be required to go out and arrest them. That's the sort of thing, the sort of question I have in mind, Tim. How would you respond to that?
It's really a case by case basis. But I think the underlying problem here is there's no trust. Especially with what you're seeing now, people in coats on the street with masks, just pulling people off and throwing them in the vans. I mean, that scares everybody, and so there's no trust that the federal government is handling this properly. And and so to have this conflict at the local level is disconcerting to everybody. But again, like, there needs to be due process. This is what takes the temperature down. If you go to a local community and say, look, we're not sure, we've got a tip, we got whatever, we have to take this person, but they're going to have due process. And everybody said, okay, I mean, this is a really sad situation, but they're going to get due process, and no one's going to put their thumb on the scale. I think that's just a different scenario, but we're not living in that environment right now. There's no trust that the federal government would do that.
These police officers required to go out and pick somebody up and hold them until the ICE guy gets there. And that to me is just a horrible scenario. Yeah. And then one more thing that before we get off this deportation topic, I do not understand what right Trump has to incarcerate deportees, even if the deportations were warranted. Suppose in the El Salvador case, all those Venezuelan immigrants had been given fair hearings and were deported justly. What right does Trump have to imprison them indefinitely? Have these people even been charged with a crime? How does the El Salvador prison differ in principle, in my opinion, from a Nazi concentration camp or a Soviet gulag? As suggested before, that I could get cranked up about this. This is what really cranks me up. I just don't see the difference.
Yeah. I got to jump after this, guys, because I got another call I got to take. But I agree. That's what's so maddening about the thing, is that there is no difference. You're not deporting someone to their home country. in what Trump wants to do. It would be human trafficking of someone that's not going back to their home country. They're going to go to this gulag in El Salvador. That's not a deportation. And again, this is where the trust is eroded and all the rest. And you need to have a process in place. And he's just thinks he doesn't have to abide by these frustrating rules.
Now, will the Democrats say that, or is this one of those, we don't want to post our flag on that issue? Absolute nonsense. If you're going to post your flag anywhere, you post your flag on this issue.
Well, I think you have to have a very firm, strong stand on it. There's no doubt, because it's so egregious. I don't think you need to live there. Like I said, most people are worried about their economic well-being and their hospital and their health care and their job and what's happening in their community. But you absolutely have to take a very clear stand. Again, this is the rule of law that undergirds our system, that protects people who can't protect themselves, that protect people from the infringement of the federal government. And I think that if you begin to erode that, who's next? Who's next? A political opponent that you don't like? A working class person, or someone who's poor or black or brown? Then they're, even though they're American citizens, they're next.
I couldn't agree more. Tim, there are lots of subjects we have not been able to discuss because we haven't had time. Drug addiction, housing, food security, climate change, firearms policy, and then if you can have some time in the future, we'd appreciate another hour to discuss public policy. Thank you for this opportunity today. You have any concluding remarks? You indicated that you needed to get onto another call.
Yeah, no, I'm good. It was great to be with you. Be happy to come back and maybe even do it in person down there.
I was going to say, I'm going to make you
That'd
come
be
in
great.
person.
That'd be
We're having so
great.
much trouble with our equipment here that we'd
Yeah.
love to have you in person. We can do it a little bit easier that way.
And
love
I
it.
thank you for realizing that Ohio is more than the 3 C's.
100%. 100%. I know
Thank
what
you,
you're
sir.
going through. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, he's off the meeting.